until it starts recording. All right, so it's recording now, yeah. So, okay, welcome everyone to this 5th webinar in the We Do Wind Diversity Seminar series. Today we're going to talk about smart business benefits of diversity in climate tech. For those of you who don't know me, okay, everyone here knows me, but maybe there'll be somebody listening who doesn't. My name's Sarah Barber. I lead the wind energy program in the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences, but I also chair the diversity committee of the European Academy of Wind Energy. Some of the committee members are here today as well. I'll introduce you to them in a minute. And so what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to do a quick introduction. I've now lost a little bit of time on that, but I'm not going to be talking for that long. And then I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to introduce herself and then talk about more detail about her experience with diversity in climate tech and focus on some things to do with the business benefits that hopefully we can take away from this talk. And yeah, then we've got time for Q&A. There's an advantage of being quite a small group. Sometimes it's nicer to have Q&A when there's only a few of us. So hopefully we can have some interesting questions for Helen, and then I'll do a quick closing. I've got a few slides to show about next steps in the last couple of minutes. So is everybody okay with that? Any questions? Everybody can hear everything all right and see everybody except for Helen? All right. So just a quick introduction. Okay, the European Academy of Wind Energy, quite a lot of people sitting here are actually in the committee, but just for other people that you know, we were formed as part of the European Academy of Wind Energy last year because the Academy is quite keen on improving diversity, equity and inclusion in wind energy with a focus on science. And we're trying to provide tools for people to be able to do that themselves. We also want to increase the visibility of underrepresented groups. And we also want to act as positive role models by actually improving diversity, equity, and inclusion within our own organization and organizations. So this is us. So people who are here today, maybe just quickly say hi. So I'm here. James is not here. Sarah's here.
Hi, hi.
Sarah, hi. Julia is not here. Stefan's here.
Hi.
And G is not here. And let's say our honorary member is also Donatella until she becomes an official member, who's also been contributing to organizing these webinars. So thank you again for that, Donatella. Okay, and then the connection to We Do Wind. We Do Wind is a project. Actually, it's not run by the Swiss Wind Energy R&D Network anymore since last week. It's run by the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences, but it's all about getting people to collaborate more and share data with each other via the concept of challenges. And we have this space on the topic of diversity as well, where we're focusing on collecting lots of different inputs and experiences and ideas from lots of different people from different fields and different areas through these webinars and also through a digital space that we've got. So you can sign up for this space if you want to get involved and get regular updates and have discussions. Actually, somebody wrote in the discussion last week to one of my questions about one of the previous webinars. So maybe if you're interested in that, you can take a look at what that person said. Maybe we can get a conversation going on the platform. So why are we doing it? Well, humans need diversity to survive. Equality is between people is the basis of a fair society. It's reflected in some of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's been proven that diverse teams are more productive and happy, but we still have quite a lot of underrepresentation and discrimination, even when it's unintentional. Just some examples I've given before. I like the 1% of EU tech funding going to Black founders. There's this thing called a gender data gap, which I sometimes talk about, which is the fact that many things in the world, especially medical research, but also public areas, are often designed by men for men. Resistance is growing. I'm not going to say any more about that, except for to show you that picture. We still have lots of things we can do, and I honestly think that every one of us has a responsibility to actually contribute, and the more visible we are, the more we can contribute. So I'm one of the people who thinks that football players and tennis players should be actively doing something about the fact that the World Cup's in Qatar, for example, because they might just be footballers, but they're extremely visible and they're role models. So I do think everyone of us can do something. The energy transition is a perfect opportunity to do that because it's making everybody think about the world differently anyway. We need some structural change to implement new challenges, so let's include DEI in that change. And also we have just a very high demand on new people working in the area with different types of skills. So I want to move on to the survey for this webinar. Yeah, I mean, the survey is not a brilliant scientific survey considering there were only 14 respondents, but I'll show you the results anyway. So we asked, here we're asking 2 questions. So the blue one is, I believe that gender equity is critical to climate action. And the red one is, I believe that my organization feels that gender equity is critical to climate action. And so we can kind of see, probably as expected, the people who signed up for this webinar kind of are on the right-hand side, which is strongly agree. And the organizations that we work for are slightly shifted to the left, which is also, I guess, kind of expected. But it's good to see that the majority of organizations seem to think it's an important issue for climate action. Then the question, does your organization have diversity, equity and inclusion programs or departments? Apparently, most of them yes, a couple no, one person doesn't know. And then I suppose a more interesting question, does the DEI group work closely with your climate or sustainability teams? And we had many more no's. So it seems to be that these 2 topics aren't really yet that connected on the organizational level, which I think is quite interesting. Quite a few people don't know, which is kind of also understandable because sometimes you don't know what's going on in these groups. Yeah, and then just quickly, just to sort of lead into to Helen, what she's going to be talking about. Just want to get a couple of slides about the benefits of diversity in general. So she's going to talk about climate tech, but just in general, I mean, we've seen these numbers before. Those of you who have been to webinars before, but I mean, there are many studies and examples that show that diverse teams are more productive. And I've just got one example here that shows a couple of things, like 83% of millennials are more engaged at work when they believe their company fosters an inclusive culture, or gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform their respective national industry medians, or ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform their respective medians. And then there's another example. I mean, these are only like blog articles which reference papers. So obviously this is not like a scientific literature review. But there are articles that show that diversity is good for business. So diverse companies are 35% more likely to financially outperform the industry medians, for example, or that many studies show that diversity leads to more creativity. And other ones that show that inclusive teams can make better business decisions. And then what about for climate change? So I did take a couple of minutes to do a little bit of a literature review in order to answer this question, and I found a couple of interesting things. So I found a 2017 study which showed a positive link between more gender diverse boardrooms, an increased level of carbon disclosure reporting, and better direct carbon emission performance. It's obviously quite difficult to differentiate between correlation and causality in this topic, but these are like peer-reviewed studies, so I'm assuming they did that. And then another one is a working paper from the European Central Bank from this year, where they matched firm corporate governance characteristics with firm level CO2 emissions from 2009 to 2019. And they studied the relationship between gender diversity and carbon emissions. So they found that a 1% increase in number of female managers leads to 0.5% decrease in CO2 emissions, and that gender diversity at the managerial level has a stronger mitigating effect on climate change if females are more also well represented outside the organization, so in civil society and in political institutions as well. And they found that after the Paris Agreement, firms with greater gender diversity reduced their CO2 emissions by about 5% more than firms with more male managers. So I would encourage you to look at that if you want to know about the details about how well and statistically relevant that study is, but I thought it was quite interesting anyway. So yeah, so that's my transition to Helen. So I'd like to now just give you the stage for the next 20 minutes. Helen?
Yes, hello. I do apologize for my, I swear I exist. I'm really not sure why my camera is not working, but I'm here and I will do my best to hold your attention with my voice, and hopefully it will work. I do have some slides to share, and Sarah, I shared them with you just in case the sharing does not work as well. So we'll give it a try. Can you guys see this?
Yes. Yes.
Amazing. Oh my goodness. Well, at least you can see my slides.
We can't see it on slideshow presentation though. If you want to maybe put it on slideshow.
That's a good. Well, you know what? I'm pretty. Yeah. I need to be able to navigate too. So I'll. If can you guys read it though? Is that, or is it too small?
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. All right. I'll just tell you a bit about myself. As a place to start. So I came from a career in marketing, primarily with corporate clients, large law firms, accounting firms, and whatnot. And through my career, I had some experience with sustainability because law firms tend to have their fingers in most things, as we know. And I always loved the work. So in 2018, after the US, I live in the United States, although I'm from England originally, so I've got kind of a mixed accent. After the Trump election, I really decided I wanted to work on climate and do what I could. I didn't have a background in nonprofit or advocacy. I have a very corporate background, so I figured, I tried to figure out how to apply my skills in that way, and started my own agency. And very soon into that tenure in 2018, I met the Climate Service, and they were a piece of SaaS software that maps to the TCFD. So that helps institutional investors, the real estate investors, etc., measure and manage their risks and opportunities from climate change. So the software essentially took data from NOAA and from NASA and from, gargantuan amounts of data, and help companies on any specific asset or supply chain assets figure out what their risks are for flooding, sea level rise, extreme weather, extreme heat, etc., between now and the end in 2100. So it was a kind of a risk mapping tool, if you will. And for the first time, I thought, wow, what essentially is happening is they're putting a price on climate change. And I thought, this is a game changer. This gives us the ability to speak to business in a way that business understands. And so I wanted to dedicate the rest of my career to working on that. But simultaneously, as I worked on that, I realized the risks of doing that include companies and money and pulling out of high-risk areas. If you're going to measure your climate risk, then you understand that you need to pull your money out, right? And that's not necessarily the best strategy, because as we know, no one is immune. No location is immune to the effects of climate change. But there are some people in some cohorts that are more subject to, unfairly so, to the impacts. So I realized that. I also looked around and realized most of the funding in the climate tech industry was going to white men, and it reminded me a lot of the dot-com boom. I'm old enough to remember that. And I thought, how on earth can we pretend to solve this problem if we're coming at it with the exact same methods that we've been using that got us here? It just felt so profoundly, I don't know, contrarian to me. So, you know, around that time was when we founded Women in Climate Tech. One of my co-founders had come from the Yale School of Environment, and our first sort of steering committee, women made up of people from all over the world that were working in climate. And it really took off. I think a lot of people feel exactly the same way, that this is, you know, we're seeing huge amounts of money going into climate tech. Most of it's being steered and controlled by men, which is, you know, again, the way that it has been. And as Sarah noted, there are tremendous benefits to diversity, especially with such a large, complex, and profound problem as climate. So we really founded Women in Climate Tech as a voice for women working in the industry, a place for us to meet, to talk, to practice our slides, to help each other get opportunities, job opportunities, funding, etc. And we've had a really great track record of success placing people in jobs. You know, in our webinars, there have been deals being had in the box on the side, the chat box in the side. Many people are very open and interested in this idea. And so we've been growing organically since that time. And I'll give you the website and whatnot in a few minutes. But these are some general slides that we create or that we show on a relatively regular basis. As we know, climate change, women form a cohort of those who are most impacted by climate change, as we know, and that's across the board, across the world. Gender inequity magnifies climate risk. Women are also in the very unique position of being incredibly important to their communities in terms of resilience. So most of the small tract farmers in the world are women. They don't have access to insurance products and whatnot, but they're actively feeding their communities. And so when climate impacts occur, they're taken out a lot faster because they don't have access to the financial services products that men do typically, or at least at the same level. So that's just one example. Also, women's influence over energy use, food production, etc., are incredibly important to climate emissions reductions. And then, of course, we have the issue of population, and it's always interesting to me, especially in the United States, and you know the challenges we have over here with abortion and women's rights are, you know, it's a quite a difficult situation in many states. We see that around the world, women still do not have a lot of power over their reproductive rights. Fundamentally, why are we here? Well, yes, carbon emissions, etc. There's a lot of reasons, but population is really the main one. And I find it difficult that people focus so much on carbon removal, all of the chatter over population and lack of women's ability to control their reproductive freedom is really fundamental to that, but it's often left out of the conversation, almost always left out of the conversation. And it's profoundly why entities like Project Drawdown have found that gender equity is within the top 10, if not close to the top 5 of ways to actively draw down carbon emissions. If you elevate women and throughout the supply chain, throughout the world, in different ways, you build resilience for communities and you actively draw down carbon emissions. And the question is, how do you commercialize that? Well, that's a great question. And this is one that I like thinking about, and we're trying to tackle here at Women in Climate Tech in various different ways. So the landscape overview, I I like to use the TCFD as a framework for looking at both gender and climate because they're so interrelated. So inequity is business risk. Of course, the TCFD has us look at climate as a business risk. I think we should also look at inequity as a business risk. There are lots of risks with how skewed things are right now. Incredibly skewed worldwide. The flip side of that is gender equity as a business opportunity. Again, mirroring the language of the TCFD. Climate, there are climate opportunities, there are significant climate opportunities, and when you speak the language of business, they do tend to like to hear about them and understand those. And it's a similar paradigm with gender equity, as Sarah mentioned. There are lots of business opportunities related and sustainability opportunities related to climate, to gender equity, when it comes to profitability and whatnot. And then finally, as a climate and resilience opportunity, and this is just one example. We have so many entrepreneurs and people pouring money into climate tech right now in various different areas. I like to point out women spend 4 times more time traveling than men globally. If you're working on green transportation as a global challenge and not considering gender, considering the implications of gender, then how are you tackling this problem? The data gap that Sarah referred to is a really big blind spot that we need to be thinking of. Another question that our teams at Women in Climate Tech have been looking at is the TCFD measures climate risk. Like I said, people are using it to measure climate risk in supply chains. But if your supply chain is, for example, in the garment industry, made up of 90% female-owned small businesses, they're going to be far more at risk from climate impacts than a supply chain that's mostly made up of male businesses, because women don't have access to capital. So when they're taken out, they're taken out. And if you're not measuring climate risk in a gendered way, you're not getting the full picture. And those tools and those abilities just don't exist right now, but they need to. So this is us. We've done some research and work with Aon, which I'll send you guys the link for. But yes, our focus is diversity in climate innovation for a successful and just transition. We're global, close to 2,000 subscribers. About 50% of our subscribers are sustainability officers in the largest businesses in the world, and about the other 50% are women-owned or women-run or controlled climate tech companies in all sorts of different areas. So it's a very interesting mix of people. I'll give you a link to our gender equity report that we put out earlier this year, but it connects the dots between gender equity and the race to net zero. And I think you'll find it quite interesting, give some tips and tricks, including for diversity boards and DE&I teams to work hand in hand with climate teams. We have an upcoming event with London Climate Connection. Any of you that will be that are based in the United Kingdom, next Wednesday, we're having a get-together in London, and if you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get an invite, and we'd love you to come along. Women in Climate Tech is free to join, and you just go to our website and join. There are 2 reports that I wanted to point you to, the gender equity report and the research that one of the research papers that we've put out. We have a wonderful opportunity to survey our members, and they're very open to that. So I want to show you a few results from that in just a minute. This is the gender equity report, Accelerating the Race to Net Zero Through Gender Equity. And that link is in the slides. And Sarah, I don't know if it's possible to share those slides with everybody
Yeah.
when we're done, but the link is in there. And it's it includes quite a lot of interesting research. And then this is a piece of research that we conducted that you might find very interesting a few months ago. And the takeaways from this research: get to know the TCFD. If it doesn't impact your business soon, it soon may. Climate risk and opportunities, terms endemic to the TCFD, are being used by businesses to drive change. Consider how they may benefit your company or industry. Again, the goal of that is to show how businesses are speaking about climate change. And then as we think about fundraising and working with corporate entities on this issue, how to speak their language. ESG professionals care deeply about reporting. Companies must accelerate hiring significantly to address climate risks. I'll show you some data on that in a second. There's a significant gap and therefore opportunities for companies to clarify and quantify climate hiring and staffing goals. Consider embedding climate into job titles. Indications suggest a great retraining has begun. Gen Zs and X lead the way. It's just really interesting data, and climate and DE&I interrelated, and companies should work together. Departments should work together. Here's some reporting trends on TCFD. It's definitely a concept that is becoming more widely known. Let's see, climate reporting trends. ESG professionals care deeply about reporting. Climate hiring training. Let's see, it's no secret large businesses tend to have larger climate departments than smaller businesses. But we did a little analysis on hiring in climate versus cybersecurity. Cybersecurity can be thought of as a little bit of a proxy to the climate challenge, in that it didn't exist, right, 20 years ago, or at least in the general vernacular, and now it does. If you see, large companies have invested incredible amounts in hiring for cybersecurity, but the value at risk with climate change is far greater, and hiring has yet to catch up on the climate side. So cybersecurity hiring dwarfs climate hiring, but the risk from climate dwarfs the risk from especially long term, the risks from climate. So hiring and training, yeah, there's a lot of really interesting data in here. I'm skipping to DE&I. These mirror some of the questions that were asked at the very beginning of this conversation. Do you agree with the following statement? My organization's climate and DE&I teams work together. Really not many people strongly agreed. I think there's a huge opportunity there. One thing that I don't think the data is in here, but we saw in our survey a similar disconnect when we asked respondents how important gender equity was to climate. How important did they feel personally that gender equity was important to climate? Universally, they answered yes. And then we asked how they think their businesses feel about it, and it was far more lukewarm. So a very similar paradigm. They think there's a lot of passion within the sustainability community for gender equity, but corporations still are not really seeing the connection or the value. So that's why we're here, and that's the work that we're doing. And I'll tell you the overall vision, if I could have my druthers, would be to work with funds and grant makers and the money that is pouring into the industry to try to steer it towards or try to utilize it to remind companies as climate technologies are coming up through the works, as wind companies grow and infrastructure is developed, that embedding gender equity throughout the process, throughout the supply chain, produces triple bottom line impacts, and therefore should be encouraged. It should be in the vernacular of every climate tech business, every sustainability company, because of its value. It's like I kind of was playing over the weekend with the concept of distributed computing and fashioning that towards distributed drawdown. And we can think of gender equity as a distributed drawdown benefit. If it's magnified throughout climate work in various different ways, the benefits will be compounded, and in aggregate we can create a gigacorn, right? This term gigacorn, but through gender equity alone. And how amazing would that be? So that's the role that we play here at Women in Climate Tech. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope this was helpful.
All right, thank you. Despite not seeing you, I think you managed to maintain the interest. I found it very interesting, so thank you again. I've definitely got a question, but I'm going to open the space for other people to ask their questions first. So you want to just raise your hand in the Teams if you have a question, and then to avoid everyone speaking at the same time.
You are probably still seeing my desktop.
Yeah, I can reshare mine, because I want to reshare mine anyway.
Yeah.
Later, because I want to put my screen on, but actually we just don't have to share anything right now. Okay, questions? Stefan?
Yeah, maybe I did not get it fully. So thanks for the presentation, but what is the main reason why women are more impacted by climate change than men?
Oh, that's a great question. And I could talk about that for so long. And this is just one example. Several of our members have spent time in, for example, Pakistan, and